Hi, my name is Jonathan Roth. This is Geopolitical Futures Video. I'm joined today from Austin, Texas by George Friedman, the chairman of GPF. George, thanks so much for joining me.
Hi, Jonathan. How are you?
I am doing a lot better than the President of the United States is doing right now. President Donald Trump is in the midst of I don't know if there's any other way to describe it, a gargantuan political crisis domestically. My question to you is, what sort of impact is his domestic problems right now? What kind of impact is that having on his relationships with countries around the world?
Well, we put it this way. First, he's been in a crisis since his election. The majority was opposed to him. His job was to convert many of those who had voted against him to his position. He has been systematically unable to do that. Whether you believe the polls or not, they're saying it's about 36% favorable to him. That means that it's mostly the people who voted for him who are supporting him, and they continue to do so. The problem is that that doesn't help him manage Congress. Congress, every Republican in Congress in the House of Representatives is running for re-election in a little over a year. They're looking at whether or not Trump is going to help them in this or not. They're looking at that 36%, and they're essentially deciding that they're not sure they want to stand with him, so they're opposing him. So one of the consequences of what's going on, regardless of whether you like him or dislike him, he's not in control of the government. He's not in control of the judiciary, obviously. He doesn't have the kind of influence he needs to pass legislation inside of Congress. And even his own administration, his inner circle, is in turmoil, which usually happens when a president is in trouble and people are blaming each other, and that's going on. How it affects him is that since he can't control his own government, he's in a position where foreign powers look at him and look at the threats he makes and so on, and they tend to wonder whether to take it seriously. Mexico is a case in point. He's made many statements to the Mexicans. In order for these things to be carried out, most of them require congressional support. It's not clear he's going to get that congressional support. And so around the Horn, China as well, and other places, he has diminished fear. He generates diminished fear. And he's going to have to handle that. He's going to have to somehow come to terms with the fact that in order to be an effective president, he has to command a majority inside of Congress. And that means he's going to have to make deals not just with the Republicans, but also with the Democrats. He's also going to have to win over some people who voted for Hillary Clinton. And the significance of last week and what happened in Charlotte is that winning them over gets harder and harder to imagine. And as it gets harder and harder to imagine, foreign governments will be less concerned about what he's going to do.
Well, I think the most obvious place where there's maybe concern that the president just does not have the support of Congress in terms of anything that he's going to do, and that's with North Korea. At what point do these threatened attacks, or at least tests on Guam that were supposed to go forward next week, at what point do maybe these things go ahead and actually happen, because North Korea, frankly, is just not concerned about what Donald Trump might be able to do back to them?
Well, one of the few things that Donald Trump can do, really without consulting anybody as a practical matter, is attack Korea if he wants to. He doesn't really want to, because he understands from his commanders, Secretary Mattis, that this is going to be a very difficult operation, given the artillery installations in the south, given the complexity of the nuclear bunkers and so on. So he really doesn't want to do this. He's leaning on China to do something, and interestingly enough, we saw a situation here where the chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff was on the border of North Korea with the commander of the Chinese military, which was quite a signal to the North Koreans. In all of this, there is a chance that the North Koreans will capitulate. One of the problems he has is that within his own political family, Steve Bannon, somebody who's very close to him, today said that basically dismissed the threats that Trump made last week to cast fire and brimstone effectively on the North Koreans. So there's a situation here where I think Congress is pretty passive. They'll take this. The judiciary is always deferential to the president in foreign policy, but Steve Bannon has decided to say that it's impossible to attack North Korea, and also that the real enemy is China. So at every point that we look within his family, politically speaking, within Congress, he simply doesn't have the ability to manage them. He doesn't have the power to manage them. But Steve Bannon's statement was particularly startling, since this man is supposed to be close to the president and his chief strategist.
Look, give me your final analysis, maybe not final because he still has another, 3.5 years left. But given the fact that he has Steve Bannon saying one thing on foreign policy pronouncements that are extremely important to the country, and at the same time we've been hearing reports that Secretary Tillerson, Secretary of State Tillerson, and Defense Secretary Mattis have some sort of informal agreement that one of them will always be in the country no matter what, depending on what decisions are made by the president. What's your analysis on how this presidency is going?
Well, the first thing that it has to do is create a stable White House. A White House that's not continually upheaval, that's predictable, that is managed well. He has a new chief of staff. It hasn't quite worked that way yet, but it may well work that way. The second thing he has to do is face an existential fact of his position. He won with a minority. He's got to get to a majority position above 50%, 55%, even 60% of people approving of him before he's going to have traction in Congress. He threatens them, but he has nothing to threaten them with. A president who can really hurt them in a re-election has a lot to threaten them with, and they're going to fall into line. Right now, his biggest problem is the Republicans. But his ultimate problem is if he can't persuade some Clinton voters that he's an okay president, that he's better than the choices out there, he's not going to be able to govern. He cannot continually govern as if he were running a campaign. In other words, he's constantly on the attack against someone. And that's not necessarily a bad way to campaign for president. But you can't manage the presidency and be in a minority position and be hostile to anyone. You can deny that you're in a minority position. You can claim that all the polls are lies and everything else. But you can believe that the people who come to a Trump rally represent the majority of the people. But the fact of the matter is they don't. The fact of the matter is Congress behaves as if they don't take them seriously. And pretty soon, outside of the context of the Korea thing, foreign nations will really continue to disregard him. So this is a case where domestic politics, which I normally ignore, has substantial geopolitical consequences. Because if the president of the country that produces 25% of all the world's economy, that has the largest military, is disregarded by major players, the entire way that the world works changes.
Very interesting words, George. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.